Welcome to Under the Lens. Come and enjoy an extraordinary, raw, and unfiltered podcast that delivers debate, discussions, and interviews about film, pop culture, and everything in between. Here is your host, film critic and journalist, Byron Lafayette.
Greetings all and welcome to the program. Today we're going to be discussing a fascinating topic, mainly Zack Snyder's Justice League Trilogy. We'll be speaking about both the completed edition being sold right now in stores and the hypothetical trilogy that he charted out 5 years ago. And finally, we'll discuss what would change if Zack Snyder returned after the Warner Media Discovery merger to finish his Justice League story. For this lively discussion, I have a very special guest with me today, Ryan Wall, host of the Raw Quiz Show. Thanks for coming on the program, Ryan.
Thanks for having me, Byron. I'm looking forward to it. This is a topic that is quite dear to me.
Yeah, same here. We've had some interesting conversations before around the idea of Zack Snyder and his universe that he created within DC. So, kind of to get us started here, let's talk a little bit about the Justice League trilogy that's being sold right now, because I noticed like a lot of fans noticed, when they announced the Snyder Cut going to be coming on 4K and Blu-ray, that they then suddenly saw also that they had packaged Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Zack Snyder's Justice League into one 8-disc package, and they called it the Justice League trilogy. And I know there was a lot of discussion about that and stuff, and some people liked the idea, some people didn't. How overall do you feel about it?
Yeah, I think there's a bit of nuance, as usually goes into these things. That, for me personally, like I viewed it as a trilogy from the get-go. Kind of in the way that like the MCU has trilogies within a larger continuity. And I always viewed it that way. Obviously, Warner Bros. Has different feelings on that matter because, Zack Snyder's Justice League is not the canon thing to the DCEU. It's canon to my heart.
Same here.
But yeah, I mean, like, obviously, like, if you were to just watch those three movies, I don't know that you would have the best understanding of what's going on. Like, Diana is introduced in Batman v Superman, but is expanded on in Wonder Woman. And as a result, like, Zack Snyder's Justice League and the theatrical cut of Justice League don't do a lot to move Diana as a character because that's already happened, right? So, it does work as a trilogy in the sense that if you're viewing this as Superman's story primarily, and I do view it as Superman's story primarily, it is a trilogy to me. You do have a very clear birth, death, and resurrection 3-part epic going on with this trilogy. So
I would agree with you. Yeah, I almost feel like it would have been almost maybe a little bit more appropriate to maybe have titled it the Man of Steel trilogy. Almost, it feels a little bit more because, like you said, obviously Man of Steel is solidly Superman's story. Batman v Superman it's still like, even though Batman is there, I feel like it is mostly Superman's story of what he's going through, and kind of Batman, his coming up against him and such. And then, of course, even though Superman is only in maybe 40 minutes of Justice League, maybe, if that, yeah, he still is very much of a presence over everything.
Yeah, I feel like it's interesting. He has diminishing screen time across the trilogy, and yet inflated importance as it goes on. So.
No, that's a perfect way of saying it, because yeah, he is the most important character in Justice League, even though he's barely in it.
Everything that happens in Justice League is a response to what happened to Superman in Batman v Superman. Everything that happens in Batman v Superman is a response to Superman in Man of Steel. So like
No.
the whole thing is focused on Superman, and that's sort of how I view it. It is more a Superman trilogy, I think, than a Justice League trilogy. Like, Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman get plenty of time and development across this whole thing. Wonder Woman less so than the other two of the Trinity, because she has her own film.
Mhm.
And then Aquaman, you can tell that Snyder, and even in Whedon's version, they were counting on the fact that James Wan's Aquaman was around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
And the only ones they put, and by they I mean Zack Snyder in this case, put significant emphasis on in Justice League to make sure that you were invested in them independent of another film is Flash and Cyborg.
Definitely, yes. Mm-hmm.
Because they didn't have the benefit of being like, oh, well, their film's right around the corner.
Mm-hmm.
So you had to buy into them immediately, so that Snyder really laid the groundwork for those characters in Justice League. That gets butchered in the theatrical cut for Cyborg especially.
No, that's very true. Because when I saw the Snyder cut, I was amazed at how much extra content there was for Flash and Cyborg. And I expected it obviously with Cyborg, just because when you saw the trailer, you saw how much was cut of his story. But like with Flash, I was very surprised. Because I was always kind of expecting him to be a bit more of a peripheral, character. But I was pleasantly surprised with how much extra he had in there, and I think I agree with you that they had to do that because it wasn't a given how soon his film was going to be coming out.
Right, and the funny thing is too, like even in the theatrical cut, Flash is not given quite the full shaft. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I firmly believe the best stuff for the Flash was left on the cutting room floor, which is bewildering.
Mm-hmm.
But compared to Cyborg, like in the theatrical cut, Flash is actually still a pretty solid character,
Mm-hmm.
Cyborg is just gutted and excised from the theatrical cut. Like, he's there, and that's it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, like I mean, it's really sad when you look at like the character of Cyborg in the theatrical that you could literally cut him completely out of that, and really the story would still basically function. I mean, there'd be some other parts, but most of it would not. It would be perfectly fine. We don't have any of that sequence of him inside the mother boxes, which was vital, to finding out how they were defeated.
Yeah, and I know a lot of people have said this, but it bears repeating. That scene, though, like Snyder has said that Cyborg was the heartbeat of his film, and you definitely feel that watching Zack Snyder's Justice League. But man, that line that I'm not broken and I'm not alone
Oh,
hits different. Knowing what happened to Snyder, during the filming of this, like that is incredibly heartbreaking and at the same time empowering.
mm-hmm.
It's just like I cannot believe this was left out.
It's so true. I felt the exact same way. It was such a powerful line, and like you said, it just hit home so much more of seeing what actually happened. That of how it was so beyond just of taking editing control away. That it was so much more than that. And so I 100% agree that that whole sequence within the boxes was just incredible. I loved that. It was one of my favorite scenes in the film itself.
Yeah, me too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so definitely I agree with you. I think it is more of a Superman trilogy than it is a Justice League trilogy. But at the same time, I kind of understand marketing wise why they wanted to market it as the Justice League trilogy. That it sells a little bit better, it looks a little bit better. And let's face it, they Warner Brothers is always trying to play catch up to Marvel, and and they're looking at like the full Avengers quadrilogy, and stuff, and they want something comparable to be able to put out there, even if they hated every step of the way to get there.
Sure. And to be fair, like when you're watching Zack Snyder's Justice League, even though I don't want to go back on anything we said, but Superman is barely in that film, and you don't want people walking away with the impression that he's going to be the main screen time factor for all three of these movies.
Mm-hmm.
So in that sense, like it makes sense to market it as a Justice League trilogy, even though I think thematically it is a Superman trilogy that just happens to have the other guys involved.
No, that's very true. Like, almost in not to go down too big of a rabbit trail, but I feel almost that way about like Endgame almost. That Endgame is very much a Tony Stark story in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's Iron Man 4 with everyone else.
Exactly, yeah, because so much of that film completely hinges on his development, his storyline. But like you said, it includes everybody else as well.
Not to be reductive of everyone else involved, but yeah, that they knew what they were going for, I think.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, like looking at obviously, this somewhat of a completed trilogy, I would say for the Justice League story that, Zack was telling, or part one of that story. Even though the Snyder cut, does end on, I don't exactly call it a cliffhanger, because, the what you're seeing is a future storyline coming, but at the same time, I feel like all of the storyline that they were telling of that film was wrapped up suitably. So I feel like it was a soft cliffhanger.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know.
Like, obviously, I think anybody who's a fan, myself included, would rather see everything wrapped up. Um, but in a way, like I'm just thankful we have this to begin with. Because there's an alternate universe out there somewhere where we just never get this.
Sure, where we are stuck with the 2017 version, as the trilogy capper.
Yeah. There's an alternate universe where that's the case, and those people are wildly unhappy.
Yeah. It's very true, because I was actually, in preparation for this podcast, I was kind of thinking, over some of the aspects of the film, and I was thinking like, oh, definitely, like, if you cut the nightmare sequence, out, if you cut out, Darkseid saying, ready the Armada, and stuff, yes, you do have a more, kind of tied up with a bow, storyline. But at the same time, I was like, I wouldn't like it as much, without those elements.
Yeah, and to me, like, I don't really understand. Like, even if you were gonna say, let's say you're Warner Bros., right? So, like, when Avengers teased Thanos, they had no idea what that was gonna end up at. Like, they knew they were pointing at Thanos and that eventually they'd get to that, right? That's fine. Right? So even if you decide, oh, hey, we're not working with Zack Snyder anymore, we think, he's not right for this project or whatever, you could still use the direction it's pointed in.
Exactly. Yes. I 100% agree with that. Like, that's why I don't fully understand why they don't want to view his version as canon, because like you said, you could, and in a few moments we'll talk about a little bit of his planning for the original trilogy, but it's like, you could throw all of that out, and you could say we're still going to have Darkseid come and do like a Darkseid War, storyline.
Yeah.
But like that doesn't even have to be Justice League 2. It's like, because
it could be years down the road.
Yeah, because I mean, he even says basically in the film, we're ready the Armada. We're using the old ways.
It's gonna
Which
take
basically,
a minute.
Yeah, it's gonna take a minute to get through all the star systems.
Yeah.
He can't use the ways that like Steppenwolf is using. So yeah, so it's like this could be 10 years down the road. This could be 5 years, 6 years. They could do the Injustice League as Justice League Part 2 if they wanted to.
Yeah, and they don't have to deliver on that promise for a long time either. They don't, and that's just it. Like, yes, what if you ask me? Ideally, what would you have happen? Right, the ideal world would be Zack Snyder coming back to finish his story
Mm-hmm.
and having all the actors and actresses that he intended to have. Is that going to happen? No, sadly.
No,
But even
it's
if
true.
it doesn't have to happen, you don't have to have that scenario to accept Snyder's Justice League as canon.
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't have to do exactly what he was going to do. You can just use what he laid down and hope for the best.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
No, that's very true because looking at ahead, like we don't know if Ben Affleck would come back. Possibly he may not. Who knows? He came back for the reshoots of the Snyder Cut. He came back for the Flash. He might be willing to come back, but we don't know. And in all honesty, we probably won't know until we see the Flash because we don't know if that movie is writing him out or not.
Yeah, it sounds like,
Mhm.
I mean, and we know the reshoots for Justice League were a low commitment thing.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it's not like it took him half a year to do it.
No, yeah.
And it seems like the Flash stuff also kind of a low commitment thing.
Mm-hmm.
Would Ben Affleck come to be a major character in another Justice League film? I don't know. Maybe. You'd probably have to sweeten the deal pretty good because he got burned pretty hard in all this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't even blame him, I'd probably be kind of done with it and ready to move on myself, but
no, yeah, like I don't blame him, and stuff, and the thing is that there was a lot of rumors, back in the day, like, oh, Matt Reeves, pushed him out, and stuff, and I don't really necessarily believe that. What I do believe and what I think probably ended up happening was, after Ben Affleck stepped aside from being director and producer, it seemed like, Warner Brothers basically was really pushing for a new direction with stuff. And I have a feeling that, if anything, they were the ones who kind of, gently let it be known they wouldn't mind if he stepped aside, to let Reeves do his own thing.
Yeah, plus we have to remember too that even though Ben Affleck's Batman is viewed fairly positively right now, when Batman v Superman came out, there were a ton of people that were just so upset that Batman was killing, and so upset. Like, some people just hate Ben Affleck to begin with, and like, it's a hard hill to overcome. And the way Batman v Superman was absolutely dragged through the mud in the media, and you have the sad Affleck meme, like that takes a toll on a person, and
oh yeah.
I'm sure he feels quite happy that, years later with Zack Snyder's Justice League, people are going, well, you know what, Ben Affleck was pretty good as Batman. What, I'm sure he's happy and all that, but when you go through what was gone through with both the theatrical cut of Justice League and Batman v Superman, I doubt you're like itching to get back in the cowl.
No, exactly. And especially, because, he, and also, I mean, all the personal issues he was going through at the same time,
Yeah.
he's, and also he's an older dude, he's, he's in like his late 40s,
He was cast as an older Batman.
yeah. He was cast as an older Batman. And to get into the kind of shape that he got into, that's not easy, especially at that age.
It's not easy for a young person.
No, no, exactly. I mean, we saw how hard Hugh Jackman had to work to get into shape for Logan, and
Yeah.
and he was the same age as Ben Affleck at that point. And so, so definitely, like you said, if he was very well received now, with the Snyder Cut, everybody loves him. And who knows, when Flash comes out, he might be very well received as well, and he might be in the mood to come back. Who knows? But I don't necessarily think it's 100% of a sure thing.
No, I think what you could get him to commit to, what you could maybe even get Zack Snyder to commit to, is have Zack Snyder work with DC Animation to complete part 2 and 3 as an animated feature, it's not as physically demanding because you're only providing voice and maybe mocap. And even then, mocap can be outsourced.
No, exactly.
You would need mocap for Ben Affleck's face, but the body could be just any old buff guy. So, any stuntman could do the mocap for Batman. If you even needed to do mocap, because, if you do DC animation, you may just have reference footage, so...
Yeah, like not all of those like some of those animations clearly do use mocap, and some of them don't.
Right.
But
yeah, I think that's a low commitment thing for the actors that I think they would be more than happy to spend time offering their voices. Just look at Marvel's What If, right? They managed to get, not everybody, but they managed to get a lot of people who have bit roles to come back and voice their character for What If. And part of that is it's low commitment. Voice is easy. I'm not disparaging voice actors. Easier than having to be a superhero in a film.
Oh yeah,
it's something that they can do. Ideally, I would prefer a big live action continuation of what we've seen. But if we can get Zack Snyder and all the actors and actresses back on this project for a couple animated films, I'm happy to take that as a compromise.
No, I 100% agree with you, and and honestly, and this may not be a hugely popular viewpoint of mine, in the Snyderverse community and stuff, but I honestly think that pushing to say hey, letting Warner Brothers and Discovery know, hey, we would accept this, I think it would be a very large possibility to get those animated films, part 2 and 3, because we saw how well the Snyder Cut has sold over the last couple of weeks. It's been number 1 and 2 solidly for months, in the pre-orders and everything. And once we get the final numbers, we're going to see it made a lot of money and it sold a lot of things. And and if you took those numbers and you said, okay, well, what if those were for part 2 and 3 in animated form? They would make a fortune, on animated films if those same amounts were sold, those same numbers.
Yeah, and we're in a multimedia landscape for films right now. Part of that is due to what COVID forced on us, but I'm just thinking if you're Warner Bros. And you approach Zack Snyder and say, hey, why don't you finish out your story? We'll give you all the resources of DC animation. We'll try and get everybody who you want for your cast back on board. And you just take the time, take this sum of cash, finish it. I bet. All right, so an animated continuation of it is probably not going to satisfy the general audience. But you can put it on HBO Max, you can have a home video release, and limited theater showings. You can limit it to New York, LA, hit the big cities. And it'd probably do pretty well.
Oh, it definitely, yeah.
So, I'm not asking for the moon here,
No, exactly. And you think, that the so-called Snyderverse could honestly have a very rich life in animated form, because not only the Justice League 2 and 3, but you could do an animated Deathstroke movie, with his name is escaping me now. The actor who played, Deathstroke. You could do stuff with, Lex Luthor, with Jesse Eisenberg,
Yeah. And I know Jesse would come back. He seems to have.
Oh yeah, it's quite funny, how he's been very much of he loved the role. He was in an interview. He's like, he looked at the camera and he was like, if anybody has any connections out there, he's like, I'll come back.
Yeah, I know a lot of general audience people didn't. I love probably my favorite comic book movie villain of all time is his Lex Luthor.
Mhm.
But what's funny is like all that negative press about him didn't seem to phase his enthusiasm at all.
No, it almost seemed to hype him up almost.
So
Oh,
I appreciate that. I think he would come back if asked, regardless, animated
mhm,
in another movie altogether. I bet you could get him back.
mhm. No, I definitely agree, and especially, because, when we look at Zach's original plans, for Justice League 2 and 3, and for those who are listening too, his original plans, he outlined these before Batman versus Superman and kind of concurrently with it. Um, and Zach has gone on record of saying that these plans have changed. That like if he were to come back and do a live action Justice League sequel, he said it would not be the story that he originally told because he said he had changed it.
Sure, that's what
Mhm,
happens in the creative process.
exactly, and like and honestly, I love Snyder, and I love what he's done with DC. That being said, he had a few questionable choices, in Justice League 2 and 3. The idea of like Batman and Lois being in a relationship was kind of weird,
Yeah, you
you know.
don't need that aspect to sell what he was
Mhm.
using that for anyway.
Exactly. Yeah, there was a few elements that I was kind of like, okay, yeah, you can maybe remove that here and there. Um, you know, Clark and Lois's son being the new Batman in the future. It's an interesting idea. I don't know how people would feel about it, but it was still interesting. Um,
Yeah, and I
mhm,
mean, there's all sorts of things like the whole concept. Spoiler alert for a
yeah.
movie that may never exist. Spoiler alert.
Mhm,
The whole idea that this broken timeline was because Batman refused to sacrifice himself, and the way to fix it is to go back to that moment to ensure that he dies and Lois lives for the protection of Earth. Like
mhm,
learning that he has to die for the universe to have a chance, or the
mhm,
multiverse to have a chance, I
mhm.
should say,
Mhm,
is a compelling arc. I mean, we know very little about it
mhm,
other than where it kind of terminates
mhm,
and the little bit of the nightmare sequences we've seen in between, you know.
mhm.
but but I would not mind seeing that story.
No, yeah, the same here. I found it very, very compelling, and it was very interesting, and kind of seeing the tease of it within like the Snyder cut when Superman's holding Lois's body, and Darkseid puts his hand on his shoulder. It's like it was a very, very dark and very intriguing scene. That I would love to see play out.
In the
Um,
Batcave. In the
in the
Batcave.
Batcave.
Yeah,
You
that's
know,
wild
it's
stuff.
no, it is very much, and I know that there is a lot of people who were, not 100% sold on the idea that Clark's hold on or his lifeline to humanity was through like Lois, but I think that was a very interesting idea for Snyder's universe.
Well,
That he's not 100% at that point necessarily the Boy Scout. That it, that he has other people tethering him.
well, it goes back to a line from Man of Steel when Clark is having trouble with his senses just overwhelming him.
Hmm.
And Martha comes to see him at school and he says, the world is too big, Mom.
Hmm.
And she says, well, make it smaller.
Hmm.
So instead of trying to love all of humanity, which is difficult even for humans to do, instead of doing that, he did make it smaller by loving Lois.
Hmm.
You know,
She was the
the
stand-in, basically, for
right,
humanity. Mhm,
right, the innocence of humanity, the things he values and loves about humanity
mhm,
are represented by Lois. Of course, that makes him uniquely vulnerable through
mhm,
Lois,
mhm,
which is exactly what Lex Luthor used in Batman v Superman and what
mhm,
Darkseid used
mhm.
in future Justice
Yeah.
League.
Mhm,
So, yeah, I mean, that's an interesting concept, and I think it's a little more realistic than Superman just naturally being the most altruistic, amazing person ever. And I think his character is very, and I mean character as in virtue, is very good in the Snyderverse, but I understand the concept of, the world being too big, you have to make it small. And I think that makes things a bit compelling.
I agree. I think that was a very, very compelling sequence within like Man of Steel, and I think it's interesting that because Snyder loved to do parallels, between like previous movies and the ones that he was doing and the future ones, and I have a feeling more than likely that he probably would have paralleled that scene where in Man of Steel where Clark is kind of losing control, and his mom is the one who calms him down. That more than likely we probably would have seen that it would have been like a dark version of that scene in the Bat Cave, and instead of his altruistic good mother doing it, it was Dark Side.
Yeah, exactly. It seems to me that Snyder was drawing a lot from the Injustice comics with regard to the nightmare scenario. Obviously not completely, because spoilers for Injustice, which by the way, if you haven't read, you should.
It's an excellent series.
It really is. And in that case, though, Superman turned, I won't say all on his own, but it wasn't like a dark side with the anti-life equation manipulating him. It was a scenario where Joker laced some kryptonite with Scarecrow's fear toxin, and Superman ended up tripping on that and inadvertently killing Lois and his unborn child.
Oh.
Thinking that it was Doomsday. Because he's tripping on fear toxin.
That's what he's seeing.
Yeah. And so when he comes to the realization of what he has done, Joker did it, by the way. So it's like Joker did this to him, and Joker's excuse was, I was bored with dealing with Batman.
It's just a classic Joker.
So he wanted to upgrade, go to a newer nemesis, and Superman's response is to literally rip the heart out of Joker. And that broke him, So, and I should note too that there was like on Lois's body was a life support trigger for a nuclear bomb in Metropolis. So he also inadvertently nuked Metropolis. So everything in his world was crushed in an instant. So by his own hand. And at that point he was like, well, this has got to stop today.
He wasn't like Batman.
Yeah. And that's, there was a fantastic scene in there. I know this sounds all irrelevant, but there's a scene that I think could be adapted in a future Snyder continuation of Justice League that was kind of heartbreaking. And obviously Batman and Superman end up at odds, with Superman slowly growing more tyrannical. And Superman's confronting Batman about what happened. And he says, if you were me, you would have done the same thing. And Batman basically says, of course I would have. But you were supposed to be better than me. That's heartbreaking.
Oh, no, that really is, because it is a perfect look at the duality of those characters, because that it even goes to the quote from a Batman Hush, where he says how he would never win in a fight against Superman, and he lists all the reasons why. And he says, but he said, Clark's weakness is that he's essentially a good person and I'm not.
Yeah.
It's like, and it's so true, but that would be a beautiful and like that heartbreaking scene to have in a future Justice League, and it would work perfectly with the universe that's been set up.
Yep. I mean, man,
Yeah. Hmm.
I would love to see this play out, but I mean, it could be. We've talked about movies, we've talked about animated, but it could also be an HBO Max series,
Hmm.
which I would be okay with as well. If it was like a limited series with like 2 seasons,
Hmm. No,
and
I think that that could work honestly really well having a series. Almost, it almost might even work a little bit better almost than a film.
well, I mean, like, and the funny thing is, because Zack Snyder's Justice League is like 4 hours,
Mhm.
and it's broken apart as if it's like, oh, hi, here's a limited Netflix series.
Mhm.
You know?
Uh-huh. And
So,
mhm,
so it's already sort of a precedent. It's not, because you can watch it in one sitting if you want and enjoy it as a full feature length film in and of itself. Well, twice feature length, but
mhm,
still.
mhm. Because an interesting point that you mentioned of it being split, into the chapters. I think it was seven chapters. I think it was. Um,
Yeah, I think that's right.
that he actually intended Snyder. He intended it to be released in like TV form. Like he actually wanted it to be individual chapters released in episodic form. But the reason it ended up not being done that way was it was all contract issue. That they said that basically the contracts that they had for all of the actors, from going back all the way to when they did, Justice League in 2017 and everything, the union contracts were only for film. It wasn't for TV. And
Yeah,
so they weren't able to release it in the episode form. And so they did kind of the next best thing, which was, putting it together, within the film itself as chapters.
yeah, big four
Mhm.
hour film, but
Uh-huh.
also bite sized chunks.
Hmm.
I mean, even though bite size is the wrong word, because I mean, yeah, they'd be shorter than like a standard TV show episode, but they're really meaty.
Hmm.
They're really dense.
Oh, very, very much so. I mean, just all of the, just I think is it the first chapter, I think, where like basically the Amazon island gets slaughtered. It's like, oh, episode one. Yeah. You know? Oh,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
And then like what I think we would end up seeing is a sort of twisted lower numbers version of the Age of Heroes sequence, where it's an age of new heroes, and that could be quite interesting. I mean, thinking about it right now, we have an Amazon, we have an Atlantean, we have a man, and of course, at the end of Zack Snyder's Justice League, it's not a Green Lantern, but we do have a Defender from the Stars. Like
Hmm.
it, we're slowly reassembling a new age of heroes.
Hmm.
Which was
Definitely.
which was basically the theme of Zack Snyder's Justice League,
Hmm.
and even a little bit the theatrical cut. It was kind of the theme there, but
Hmm. No, definitely, yeah, because somebody mentioned, and it was very true about how his trilogy was definitely a Lord of the Rings mythical esque, thing. Like, I enjoy, the Marvel films, and stuff. And even though I have a bit of a reputation of, bad mouthing them and stuff, I do enjoy watching them, and stuff. But it's like they do have a different feel. It's not, they don't have a mythic, almost like, Greek myths feel to them, where like that's what Snyder's did. You felt like you were watching like a saga of gods and men.
yeah, and I think part of that um, is, and it's always been a bit of a criticism to to DC, but I take it as a strength for this mythic idea, is that um, our heroes in the DC universe all have a duality to them. There is a civilian life that is just a mask for their hero life. Um, and their hero personas are if not deified, then at least elevated.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas in the Marvel universe, Iron Man and Tony Stark are always consistently, to the public, the same being.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Superman and Clark Kent are two different people to the public. They're the same person.
Mm-hmm.
And, at his heart, Superman is Clark Kent. I think the reverse is true of Batman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, very true. Mm-hmm.
But my point in saying that is there's a separation,
Mm-hmm.
like Batman is a terrifying icon to Gotham. Whereas even the one hero in the MCU that until very recently, obviously, has maintained a secret identity, mm-hmm. Spider-Man, mm-hmm. is your friendly neighborhood Spider-Man. That's approachable. Mm-hmm. Whereas
people go up and take selfies with him.
Yeah. Superman is a godlike figure. Mm-hmm. Batman is a terror in the night.
Yeah.
Wonder Woman is an Amazon goddess. Mm-hmm. They're different. They're very different in the way they approach these heroes, because even though Arthur Curry is Aquaman, to the world, it's just Aquaman. Mm-hmm. Arthur Curry is not there.
No, we saw how the people treated him.
Yeah, mm-hmm. It's funny because I'll give credit to James Wan here. In Atlantis, it's kind of the opposite. It's like you may be Aquaman to the surface, but you're just Arthur Curry here, man.
That was actually an interesting, like you said, a duality that he did. That was very clever. That he was basically kind of the low life, of Atlantis.
You're the bastard son of the queen. Dude, you're making us look bad.
No, that's very true. But no, you're absolutely right. Of the duality of the different characters and how they're looked at by the public and everything is completely different. In Marvel versus DC, and I think like I said, they may change that as things go on, in the future, with like some of the Shazam type movies and stuff,
sure.
But I think for the films that we do have this, this 5 movie arc so far that does exist, I think it works really well.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I am a little more pessimistic about the DCEU going forward than a lot of people. But I'll say this, I'm not opposed. Like, I understand what Warner Bros. Wants to do. I understand that there's a contingent of people that do want that, and that's fine. I'm not in any way saying don't do it. That's fine. You're getting Shazam 2, you're getting Aquaman 2, you're getting The Flash, and all that's fine, and it can be built from the theatrical cut of Justice League. Mm-hmm. Doesn't bother me. Mm-hmm. But please, in some way, let us have this finished.
No, and the fact of the matter is especially because they claim they're embracing the multiverse, there's absolutely no reason that you can't have 2 different continualities. Like you said, I understand that there was a failure of communication with Snyder and the Warner Brothers administration, that Warner Brothers clearly wanted an ever expanding MCU universe for DC.
And Snyder wanted a finite terminating endpoint.
Exactly. He had a very 90s look at it,
Yeah, you can have both. Like, as evidenced by the fact that we're getting a Flash movie that's going to have Michael Keaton and Ben Affleck in it, and then we're going to have, at the same time, we're going to have Matt Reeves having Robert Pattinson's Batman. I'm fine. Bring it all.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I love it.
Like, if you give me 3 different versions of Batman, I'm not going to be like, well, this is difficult to follow. It sucks. We have 3 different Batman. I'm going to be like, awesome. We have 3 Batmans.
Yeah. Exactly. We can have three different styles, different, different tones. It's awesome.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Doesn't bother me at all.
Hmm.
Like, and I understand that there are some people for which that would be confusing, and that's why, like, the olive branch of an animated or a TV series finale
Hmm.
to Zack Snyder's universe would be fine by me.
Hmm.
Because I understand you don't want to put something out there and be like, well, these are canon to this part and these are canon to this part. And, like, that's a bit more work than a lot of people just sitting in a theater seat want to do.
Hmm. No, I
Um,
agree.
so that's fine. I get it. Pursue your DCEU mainline thing. It doesn't bother me. Do something to finish this, though.
Yeah, exactly. Just give, some type of closure, especially because, as we talked about, it wouldn't take that much. It's like,
Even a
you know,
comic series, I'll
it,
take it.
no, exactly. Like, yeah, I would take a comic series. I would take a graphic, two graphic novels. I would take it,
Yeah,
and, and the fact of the matter is that, is what I've said too, is that, the Snyderverse community and the Snyder fans, it's like, yes, I know that they are a minority when it comes to, the casual going movie crowd. Not everybody who goes and sees DC movies is saying, I want the Snyderverse back. I know that that is a more smaller group of people.
sure.
Uh, you know, but the fact of the matter is that those people are willing to put money on the table. As we've seen with the physical media release of Justice League,
Yeah,
and
and I happen to personally know a few people who were either down on Snyder's vision or didn't care for it at the time, but they saw Zack Snyder's Justice League and was like, maybe I was a bit harsh.
hmm
And I don't think there'll be a full, like, oh, the public will come to embrace what Snyder was going for kind of deal. But, if you think it's just the people that loved Man of Steel, Batman v Superman, and Zack Snyder's Justice League, maybe,
hmm
maybe. But there's opportunity for that audience to grow too.
oh, definitely, yeah. I mean, I saw so many, even a lot of critics who were, I thought way too harsh on Man of Steel and Batman v Superman. When they weren't necessarily harsh on other, comic book films. And they saw, the Snyder cut, and they did an about face, that they said, "Wow, this was a good movie." And there was even, some of them who said, "Well, I kind of understand those other films a little bit better now, seeing the conclusion."
Yeah, and a lot of I saw a lot of people who doubted that the Snyder cut would be very different,
Hmm.
or that weren't really invested in it. A
Hmm.
lot of those headlines ended up being like, "We owe Zack Snyder an apology." You know, like,
It's very true, that that I always had faith that I knew that it was going to be different. I had no idea it was going to be as different as it was.
no,
It's like,
I,
you know.
yeah, I was always worried that the studio had already butchered it by the time Snyder had. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
I was a little bit worried that because we have to remember at the time, because we think of Zack Snyder's Justice League as last year,
Mhm.
and that's not when this was happening.
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
in the context of the time, Batman v Superman had just come out to very negative reception,
Mhm.
and at the time, Warner Bros. Was wanting changes.
Mhm.
They did not want to be pouring money and resources into what would eventually, they at least thought, would bomb on them.
Mhm.
And to be fair to them at the time, like, they didn't have a crystal ball.
No.
so, so
And I even, like, as much as I hate to give any type of credit to Warner Brothers, I do understand some of their hesitancy, because it's like, okay, Batman v Superman did have a 70% drop in its second weekend, and what started as a very promising global release ended up, petering out before 1 billion when it should have hit 1 billion. So it's like, I definitely understand that there was, that mainline audiences didn't 100% get on board with it. So I do understand why some changes were ordered.
sure. And just because you happen to make a a profit, even if
Mhm.
it wasn't quite the profit you wanted, doesn't ensure, especially with a poorly received film, that the next one is going to be better at the box office.
Mhm.
Like a good example of that would be The Last Jedi to Solo.
Mhm.
Like it, and I'm dispassionately saying, I'm not taking a side here. I'm just saying there was a backlash to The
Mhm.
Last Jedi.
There
And the
was.
way
Mhm.
franchise filmmaking works is if you lose people on one film, you're going to lose people on the next.
Mhm.
And The Last Jedi made a ton of money. It was the next Star Wars. The Force Awakens was pretty much universally praised and well
Mhm.
received.
Mhm.
Backlash built over that film over time, of course, but
Mhm.
it hadn't quite set in yet. People were still enthusiastic about Star Wars.
Mhm.
They go to see The Last Jedi. Everybody does. You know, it makes a
Mhm.
ton of money.
Oh yeah. Mhm.
Not as much as The Force Awakens because it hadn't been so many years before,
Mhm.
but still, it made really good money.
Mhm.
Lucasfilm made a judgment call, right or wrong.
Mhm.
Just because we made money on this one, we're looking at the reception.
Mhm.
It doesn't necessarily bode well for the next.
Mhm.
I understand why, seeing the backlash to Batman v Superman, you would think, if we keep going this way, it may not work out.
Mhm. Yeah, I totally understand that point of view. Mhm.
But to be fair to Zack Snyder,
Mhm.
the Ultimate Edition of Batman v Superman comes out, and people realize that it's a better movie than they thought.
Mhm. Oh yeah, I always maintain that if the Ultimate Edition had come out in theaters, it would have been much, much better received.
Yeah, I think there's always a contingent that was always going to hate it and was
Mhm.
always going to be outspoken about it, and that's fine. But when you, as a studio, demand that things be cut for time,
Mhm.
and then it's received poorly, I can understand you going, okay, was that us or was that them?
Mhm.
We're just gonna err on the side of caution. Except that you then had proof that it was you that messed up.
Yeah. Oh, it's true. It's the epitome of the meme, where he shoots the guy and says, why would X
Yeah.
do this? It's like,
Why would Zack Snyder do this to us?
yes, you know? No, and even, like, not to go, down the Star Wars, too far down the Star Wars rabbit trail, the same thing almost happened with Rise of Skywalker. Like, I've done a lot of video editing in my time, and stuff, and when I was watching The Rise of Skywalker, I could tell there was a huge amount of content that was cut out of that.
That's like that's two films crammed into one film's runtime.
Oh, yeah, like, I was making mental notes as I was watching it, and, like, I would venture to say with my amateur video editing, experience that I would say there was probably a good 25 minutes of that film cut, possibly even 30.
Yeah, I think
Mhm,
there are some decisions that prevent it
mhm,
from ever being a great film.
mhm, I agree. Mhm.
That being said, I am perfectly fine saying, "Hey, release the JJ cut."
Oh,
You know,
yeah, mhm,
like I want to see what he had there because
yeah, mhm,
can it be worse? Maybe,
mhm.
maybe.
Maybe, you know?
Um, but I kind of doubt it. I think it would. I mean, I don't know. I'm speaking out of ignorance here,
Mhm.
but there's a chance it could go up a star rating in some people's eyes.
Oh, yeah, I mean, it's like, some of the main I mean, obviously, possibly some of the criticisms of bringing back the Emperor, stuff like that, all of that's gonna remain.
Yeah,
But a lot of the criticisms of, like, "Oh, it was so fast-paced, none of the characters got development, there was no breathing room." All of that's gonna be fixed.
yeah, or at least could be,
Mhm,
and
mhm, yeah.
yeah, like you said, there's certain things that just you- you're not going to save in an edit.
No. Yeah, and I mean, who knows? Maybe that 30 minutes was all action scenes and 5 more planets he went to. So
Yeah,
it's like
and three more unnecessary MacGuffins, and
yeah.
I mean, maybe.
Yeah,
I mean,
uh-huh.
I'm not a JJ hater,
No.
so I tend to think that, generally speaking, he's a better director than the Rise of Skywalker
Yeah. No.
shows.
I agree, and, the fact of the matter is that JJ has said that he loves Star Wars. He grew up with Star Wars. I do not for 1 second believe that he went into this with the intention of producing a subpar project. Um, we have seen, with basically, Force Awakens and Rise of Skywalker, that there was a huge amount of studio interference, of being told what needed to be done and what parameters to meet, what boxes to check, and stuff. And
And
you
he
know,
clearly had more freedom with The Force Awakens because there wasn't. What was the expectation? I mean, just more Star Wars,
no,
like.
no, exactly. And an interesting point, I would actually recommend you looking this up. It's just a rumor right now, and no one 100% knows if this is real or not. But before The Last Jedi came out, there was a leak that came out on Reddit and Imager that was supposedly the treatment that JJ wrote for Episode 8, that was supposed to be for the next director to follow. The photos of it was on the red paper that they normally do it on and such.
Yeah, to prevent
And
copying and stuff.
exactly.
Yeah.
And it's wild, it's crazy. I don't know how good it would have been. It has a very JJ flair to it, definitely. But the thing is that when I first read it, I kind of threw it out and I said, I don't think this thing is real. I think this was a fan fiction, whatever. What was actually interesting though was I went back 3 months ago and I reread it. And there's actually a lot of elements from that treatment that seemingly made its way into later releases of Star Wars comics and Rise of Skywalker. And so it makes me wonder if it actually was real because it had a Exegol-like planet that was the Sith homeworld. It had Luke's hand, being used, which was then used on Exegol in a comic book later on. There's a few different elements like that that made their way into actual canon, that kind of made me wonder if this maybe was his real treatment. And if it was, man, there was a lot of changes made to it.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And to be fair, like, I'm a pretty lonesome person when it comes to The Last Jedi because I didn't utterly hate it, nor did I think it was the best thing since sliced bread. And, like, that's a lonely camp to be in. But one thing that I got to give Rian Johnson credit for is the man went for something.
Yeah. No.
He went for it. You can argue whether or not he landed that punch, but if you look at this, it's funny we're talking about Star Wars on Zack Snyder's Justice League. We're on a different trilogy, but to finish it out, and I'll link it back too. How about that? I'll segue us back on topic. The interesting thing about it is there's like this whiplash interplay between two directors. And because The Force Awakens started things, Rian Johnson was able to flip the script and subvert things and it not completely contradict The Force Awakens. But when you re-flip it, it just becomes this back and forth. And that can feel a little dissonant, and it's pivoting around The Last Jedi, which I think will be good for it in the long run. I don't know that it'll ever be accepted as like a cult classic or anything, but when you look at the fact that The Rise of Skywalker ends the trilogy, and it's kind of like the people who like it. they're not in love with it, but the people that like The Last Jedi are in love with it, and everybody's just kind of in the middle on The Force Awakens. So eventually I think The Last Jedi will win that discussion. To what degree, I don't know. I say all that to say this, to tie back in with Zack Snyder's Justice League trilogy. You have none of that because it's all one vision. So, granted, I do think that the Martian Manhunter problem presents some questions for Man of Steel that we're kind of hand-waving, but it's not from multiple directors having conflicting visions. It's just, I think the guy changed his mind, and that's fine. It's his project. He can change his mind if he wants to.
Well, there because definitely there are, and I've been a defender of Martian Manhunter, in it and stuff, but I still will agree that there is some problems, with it,
Not
you
that they
know.
couldn't explain it. It's just
Hmm.
they haven't done that work yet,
Hmm.
which is
Exactly.
which is frustrating because right now our endpoint is a question mark.
No, like I do wish, I have to admit that I do wish that Snyder would have maybe interjected some type of line, when Manhunter is meeting Bruce at the end. Just some throwaway line or something about why he had, oh, I've been hiding because of X, you know, or
Yeah,
something. I thought I could do more as a human, whatever. I don't know, like, some type of throwaway line would have been helpful, I think.
yeah. I can't imagine Batman looking at this guy not thinking anything other than "Where have you been?"
Yeah. No, I definitely, I definitely agree. Because well, I can understand why he wouldn't have shown up in Batman versus Superman because of it's such a almost like a real time happening in the third act.
Yeah, it
I
happens instantly, but he's
Yeah.
got plenty of warning in Man of
Oh
Steel.
yeah, he does. He has like there's no reason why he couldn't be helping out there.
Yeah.
So that is one I do definitely agree. But I do agree with you though that I think one of the reasons why I think that the Zack Snyder's Justice League trilogy of Man of Steel, BVS, and Justice League, I think it will age well as time goes on. I think as more people discover it, as more people rewatch it, I think it's going to be more better appreciated as the time goes because of that singular vision that goes
I
through it.
Yeah, I can imagine 10 years from now some kid watching through this trilogy and going, "Please tell me this continued."
Hmm.
And then us going, uh,
Sorry, kid. Yeah.
uh
Uh,
we have a seat.
mhm. No, because it's like sometimes, and I know this is kind of an altruistic view, but like looking at it even from a studio point of view, that sometimes I almost feel it is better to finish a vision of a quality project for posterity's sake. Because you look at Nolan's Dark Knight trilogy. That is a singular vision film. It is a clear cut, closed ended story, and, there may be some problems here and there, some plot holes here and there, but overall, that trilogy is going to be remembered for, you know, for decades to come. I mean, in 40 years, people are still going to be watching that trilogy.
Yeah,
You know?
I will say one thing that differentiates that from this is if you watch Batman Begins and didn't know there was a sequel, you could walk away satisfied from that film.
Hmm.
And the funny thing is that continues. If you watched The Dark Knight and didn't know there was a sequel, you could walk away satisfied from that film. If
Oh.
you watch The Dark Knight Rises,
Mhm,
you know there's no sequel and you're
mhm,
still satisfied with that film.
mhm,
Here, though, that only works with Man of Steel.
mhm.
Like that, you could walk away from Man of Steel going, okay, that was really awesome.
Uh,
Good, complete story. I love it. And then, if you were to watch Batman v Superman, your next thought is, oh, I have to watch what's next.
mhm.
And when you watch Justice League, your thought will be, oh my goodness, I can't wait to see how this unfolds.
Yeah. Oh, it,
And
it's
it just doesn't.
it it doesn't. Oh, I agree. And it is, and that is going to be like, let's say worst comes to worst, the Snyderverse is not restored. They don't do any comic books. They don't do any animated, nothing like that. Um, I will still love this trilogy to pieces. But I will always be frustrated. When I rewatch, Justice League and get to the end.
Sure.
And and because as I mentioned briefly before, it's like Snyder, he could have made the trilogy way more bookended by not having the nightmare sequence. He could have filmed Joker and Batman in a cell at Arkham instead, and just ended it with Darkseid saying, "I'm going to come at some point." Martian Manhunter saying, "We're all going to get together," and it would have been much more bookended. But Snyder's
Sure.
not that kind of director. He's a provocateur. And he wants his vision out there.
Yeah, and I think, sorry, it's almost 11 o'clock here. So I think also he just, I can't imagine Zack Snyder getting to those end sequences with the prologue, or with the epilogue, and thinking, like, I know I would be thinking, I could just cut this.
Mm-hmm.
But at the same time, I can imagine him going, I could. But I really want to make my sequels.
And that's the funny thing, because a lot of people are like, Zach said he's done, he's moved on, and I'm like, if they asked him back, he would come in a heartbeat, because Zach is a master of social media and marketing, and he basically he lit the fire that created this entire Snyder Cut movement by his images and his viral marketing.
Yeah. And it wouldn't shock me at all if he included it just so people would be like, "What? We have to see what's next." It worked on me.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah, same here.
If it was intentional, it worked on me. Now I can also imagine too a third scenario where he gets to the cutting room floor and thinks, "I could cut this. I'm probably not going to get to make my sequels."
Mm-hmm.
But people do deserve to know where I was headed, so I'll just leave this in,
Oh, definitely, yeah, and overall, as bittersweet as it is, I will be grateful that he left that in, and and we honestly don't know what's going to happen with this merger that's happening. They have said that they said their number one priority is to give the fans what they want. And to repair they said they also want to repair the relationships with studios and filmmakers. So,
tell that to Nolan.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Who just went to Universal.
Yeah. Exactly. So
what a big loss, though. Goodness gracious. You have to be scared that happened.
Oh, and it's like, honestly, it just shows the huge just, cluster, and I won't finish the word there so that we don't get an explicit tag on here. But it's like, how do you mess that up, losing someone like Nolan as a studio? How do you not give the man everything he wants?
Yeah, I would be begging the man to stay. Like, he's a consistent box office reliability.
Mm-hmm.
He can produce things that not only get award season bait, but also make money. Like, if you're a studio, you want Chris Nolan on your side, man.
No, it's true. I mean, how many filmmakers can you really think about that are getting Oscar nominations and box office gold? I mean, it's like, okay, James Cameron.
Yeah, but James Cameron puts out one film every 20 years.
Yes.
I'm exaggerating, but
that's the joke that James Cameron has released, that he is making 4 more Avatar sequels, and he has delayed it another 4 years. But
James Cameron, buddy, you don't have, you got less years ahead of you than you do behind you, man. Like,
it's true. Like, I felt sorry for I can't the actor. I'm blanking. The actor who was the villain in the first Avatar.
Yeah. I can picture him perfectly.
Yes, fantastic actor.
Gosh, it's gonna bother me. I'm gonna look it up.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was I remember his character name, but I can't remember the actor's name for the life of me.
Stephen Lang.
Stephen Lang, yes. That it's like, basically he has had to stay basically he's had to stay ripped for like 12 years basically for these sequels. It's like,
how old is he now? Like,
he's got to be in his 60s now, late 50s or early 60s. It's like, and it's funny because he said he's in all of the sequels and stuff.
69 years.
Oh, he's 69. Dang.
All right, let's see how old James Cameron is. Yeah, let's see.
Was it
67. All right, good.
67? Oh,
Look, y'all are running out of runway.
yeah, exactly. It's like you gotta, and especially because those Avatar films take a lot of time to make. So it's like, and he has like,
Clearly.
yeah, yeah, he has 4 sequels outlined. It's like, come on, man. It's like I don't, I mean, there is literally there is literally a good chance that I will have children by the time the third Avatar movie comes out. Like, oh
There's a good chance that your children will have
yeah.
children by the time the third Avatar comes out.
We're gonna take Grandpa Byron to go see Avatar 4.
Made by somebody who's not James Cameron, because
uh, it'll be the hologram of James Cameron that he input all of his memories into.
it's James Cameron, but it's the scientist from iRobot.
Yeah. Oh my gosh!
I'm sorry, my responses are limited.
And you know what the funny thing is that I could honestly see like James Cameron wanting to do something like that if the technology existed.
Oh, absolutely. And he would donate it to a Titanic museum.
Yeah. Oh
That's
my
the
gosh.
most James Cameron thing I've ever heard.
Oh my gosh. Oh, it's hilarious, man. Well, I definitely I think we've had a great conversation here, and I think we've covered a lot of interesting points when it comes to the trilogy, both the de facto trilogy, that we have currently, and the possible future trilogy or TV show or comics or graphic novels, duology, whatever it ends up being,
Yeah.
and even like you said, even if it's even directed by Snyder or not, we could see the Warner Brothers merger. We could see them come in and say, we're doing Dark Side War, and we're bringing the brothers who did Endgame in. It's like
Yeah.
we could see all different types of stuff happen. But yeah, I think overall, I think that if this is the end, with Snyder, I think that we have gotten a great trilogy from him. We've gotten something that's going to stand the test of time.
Yeah.
And as disappointing as it is, I still will be happy that at least we got, his vision of Justice League, even if we don't see anything else. But fingers crossed that with this merger we will. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah. I mean, it's not beyond hope.
Mm-hmm.
Slim,
Mm-hmm.
but still there.
Uh-huh. Yeah. There is this one leaker. His name's Mikey Sutton, and he has a very good track record of leaks with Marvel. He actually was the one who said that Haley Steinfeld was going to be cast as Kate Bishop in the Hawkeye series, and he said that like years ago before even anybody knew Kate Bishop was going to be in it or that there was going to be a Hawkeye series. He said it, so he has a pretty good track record with a lot of stuff. He claims that the merger, the new bosses do want to make Justice League 2. He claims that. Who knows if it's true? We can hope that he is correct, like he's been, with his Marvel scoops.
Sure.
But yeah, is there anything you'd like to add?
As far as this discussion, I think we've gone a little over, much like James Cameron.
Yeah. Definitely. Well, would you like to go ahead and tell our listeners, where they can find your work and what you've been up to?
Yeah, mainly. Look, I have one major project going online. It is the Raw Quiz Show on YouTube. You can. Well, I mean, you can't see Byron there because Byron's a tricky fellow. But in season 3 of the Raw Quiz Show, Byron was a combatant for the latter half of that. The Raw Quiz Show is a game show for the 21st century. It is a quiz show where it's not just questions. It's tasks and random categories and mayhem. And of course, it's very competitive, and competitive in the sense that our combatants, because they're not contestants, they are fighting each other directly, are able to not just boost their own scores, but damage each other. And it carries over episode to episode. So it is serialized. It's random. It's chaos. It's humor. I've been a lot more formal here in this, But the Raw Quiz Show is a very, very bombastic, fun trivia show. The trivia show for the 21st century. I would love it if you would come watch an episode or two, like and subscribe and share it. We'd love to have you.
Well, and I can add on to that the Rock Quiz Show is a huge amount of fun to watch. It was a huge amount of fun to be a participant in. It is truly unlike any game show I've ever seen or participated in before. You never know what is going to happen episode to episode, and that is what makes it so special and so entertaining to watch or be a part of. So definitely check that out on YouTube. You will not be disappointed. So
yeah, I appreciate it. That's a heck of an endorsement, Byron. Thanks.
Oh, you're welcome. Well, thanks Ryan for coming on the program and chatting with me about this topic. It was a lot of fun, and definitely hope you're always welcome to come back.
Yeah, I'd love to visit again at some point.
All right. Well, thank you all, and be sure to like our Facebook page, and also to share this episode of Under the Lens. We're definitely trying to grow, and we're trying to get a wider audience. So tell your friends about it, and also on social media, let us know if there's a movie or a topic that you would like us to cover in a future episode. So until then, we will see you all later.